Hey there, Night Owl. Get ready for a dive into the fascinating and a bit disturbing world of the samurai. If you're after a calming and thought-provoking story to help you drift off, you're in the right spot. Before we jump back in time, I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Drop a comment and say hi. And if you enjoy this chill, educational vibe, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. All right, let's set the scene and imagine the land of the Japanese samurai. In the stillness of the night, when only the soft breath of wind moves across the world, let us drift back in time. Let us return not to the age of machines or modern marvels, but to an island nation veiled in fog, mystery, and ancient honor, Japan. There, in the waning days of the samurai, when sword and soul still danced together, one man stood between the old world and the new. His name was Saigo Takamori, a warrior, a poet, a statesman, and the man history would call the last samurai. Tonight, I will tell you his story, not with the noise of battle or the cry of revolution, but with gentle footsteps across wooden floors, the rustle of silk robes in the dawn, and the silence that lingers after a farewell. Close your eyes. Rest your thoughts. Let the past flow gently over you. In the far south of Japan lies a land where mountains meet the sea and ancient volcanoes sleep under drifting clouds. This is Kagoshima, the birthplace of Saigo Takamori. The year was 1828. In a humble house near the Sakurajima volcano, whose ash sometimes dusted the rooftops like gray snow, a boy was born into the Saigo family, a lower-ranked samurai clan in the Satsuma domain. His name was Kichinosuke, though the world would later know him simply as Takamori. From the start, he was not like other children. While other boys played with wooden swords and boasted of war, young Takamori sat beside his grandfather, listening to stories of loyalty, duty, and the quiet strength of men who served without seeking reward. He read Confucian texts not as lessons, but as scriptures. He believed deeply in a world governed by justice, kindness, and loyalty, even when the world around him did not. His family was poor by samurai standards. Their rice stipend was modest, their house small, and their clothes plain. But honor, that invisible cloak, wrapped around him from childhood, and he wore it more proudly than silk. The Satsuma domain was no ordinary region. Its leaders were disciplined, proud, and fiercely independent. They trained boys to become warriors, not just of the sword, but of the soul. Honor was not spoken of lightly. It was carved into the bones of every man who carried a blade. And Saigo? He absorbed it all. He trained daily in martial arts, but his true weapon was his heart. He was loyal to a fault, and it was this quality, this burning loyalty, that would define his life and lead to his death. By the time he was in his 20s, Takamori had become a trusted servant of the local lord, Shimazu Nariakira, a man with grand visions. Nariakira believed that Japan must modernize, not to abandon tradition, but to preserve it. He sent Takamori to Edo, the shogun city, as an agent, a silent warrior in the shadows of politics. But it was there, under the surface of formality and power, that Takamori began to see the truth. The world was changing, and the old ways were dying. A country divided. In the mid-1800s, Japan was a closed country, sealed off from the world for over 200 years. Foreign ships, especially from the West, were now appearing on the shores, demanding trade and influence. Many feared these ships. Others saw opportunity. And in the quiet chambers of Edo, men debated Japan's future. Some clung to the shogunate, the military rule that had governed Japan for centuries. Others whispered of restoring the emperor's authority, a symbol long held in silence but still revered. Saigo Takamori? He said little, but in his heart he believed in something few dared say aloud, that Japan must be united, and that unity must be forged not through tyranny, but through sacrifice. Exile and sorrow, but loyalty, like a sword, cuts both ways. When Lord Nariakira died suddenly, his enemies rose quickly. Takamori, now seen as a threat, was exiled to the remote island of Amamishima. There, far from the court, from politics, and from duty, he walked alone among the sea winds and watched the waves crash endlessly on black volcanic rocks. He had lost everything, his position, his purpose, his honor, and yet it was on that island, in solitude, that Takamori discovered another truth, that peace, real peace, begins within. He married a local woman. He fished. He studied. He wrote poems to the moon and to the sea. His sword lay untouched. But the world had not forgotten him. When Japan teetered once more on the edge of crisis, voices called out across the water, "Come back, Saigo. We need you." Return of the warrior. He returned not with vengeance, but with resolve. This time, not as a spy or servant, but as a leader, one of the Ishin Shishi, the men of spirit who would bring about the Meiji Restoration. Together with men like Kido Takayoshi and Yubo Toshimichi, once his friend, Takamori helped end the shogunate's rule and restore power to the emperor in 1868. It was a new dawn. Japan would modernize, open its ports, build railroads, establish schools, wear Western suits. And yet, as he watched it all unfold, Takamori grew quiet once more. He had fought for unity, for justice, but now he saw the cost. Samurai were dismissed, their stipends revoked, swords forbidden. The code of honor, the very soul of Japan, was fading beneath telegram wires and foreign boots. And for the first time, Takamori asked himself, had he helped save his country ... or destroy it? The wind that once carried the cries of samurai now rustled papers in government halls. It was the early 1870s, and Japan, under Emperor Meiji, had begun transforming at a pace never before seen. Steam trains roared through green countryside. Telegraph wires hummed like the strings of a new kind of music. Foreign advisors in top hats and frock coats walked beside Japanese men in military uniforms made to resemble those of France or Prussia. And the samurai, the proud warrior class that had ruled for centuries, were told to stand aside. No more swords in public, no more stipends, no more right to their way of life. Some adjusted, many faded quietly. But in Satsuma, the winds of change felt like a betrayal, and no one felt that betrayal more deeply than Saigo Takamori. By now, Takamori was a national hero, revered as a military leader, trusted as a man of virtue, beloved as one who had lived not for power, but for principle. He could have been rich. He could have ruled. He could have dressed in silk, dined in palaces, and grown fat on influence. But instead, he walked among farmers and soldiers, offering them dignity, hope, and guidance. When the new government refused to hear the people's pain, it was to Saigo they turned. They begged him to speak for them, to defend their honor, to restore what had been stripped away. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply asked a question. If we discard all that has given us virtue and discipline, what will become of our soul? Behind closed doors in Tokyo, men debated what to do with him. To some, Saigo was a relic, a romantic figure of the past, clinging to vanished values. To others, he was dangerous, a man too loved by the people, too powerful in spirit to be ignored. They offered him high positions in the military. They offered honors and titles. He refused them all. "I am not interested in power," he said quietly, "only in justice." But justice, in times of change, is rarely agreed upon. And so, the distance between Saigo and the government widened. In 1877, the storm broke. Former samurai in Satsuma, angry and armed, formed schools of martial training, schools that looked more and more like preparations for war. They begged Saigo to lead them. He hesitated. He loved his country. He had helped build the new Japan. He had no thirst for violence. And yet, he could not abandon the men who still believed in Bushido, the way of the warrior. In the quiet before dawn, he made his choice. He would lead them, not in rebellion, he insisted, but in protest. Not to destroy Japan, but to awaken it. We will march not with hatred, he said, but with sorrow. But the government saw only danger. And so, the army, Japan's new army, was sent to crush its old soul. The Satsuma Rebellion was not a great war. It was not filled with grand victories or heroic charges. It was a slow, painful decline, a sad song played on an old flute. Saigo and his followers were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off. They wore rusted armor. They carried old swords and muskets. They fought not for conquest, but for memory. The new army surrounded them. Town by town, battle by battle, Saigo's forces shrank. And through it all, he remained calm, offering encouragement, sharing food, writing poetry by lamplight, and speaking softly of the cherry blossom. We fall, he told them, as the blossom falls, not in vain, but because it is our time. It was September 1877. The last of Saigo's warriors, just a few hundred men, had retreated to a hill called Shiroyama, overlooking the sea near Kagoshima. There, surrounded by thousands of imperial troops and cannon, they made camp. There would be no reinforcements, no victory, only honor. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, the men prepared themselves. Some wrote final letters. Others polished their blades one last time. And Saigo, calm as always, drank tea, gazed at the sea, and waited for the dawn. At first light, the army attacked. The cannons roared. The bullets rained. One by one, the samurai fell. They did not retreat. They did not beg. They charged into the storm, shouting not in hatred, but in defiance of time itself. Saigo was wounded gravely. He collapsed beneath a tree, his leg shattered. And in that moment, he whispered something to his friend. No one knows what, but it is, said he, smiled. He was helped to his knees, given the dignity of a warrior's death. And with a final breath, he fell, not defeated, but complete. The rebellion ended. The emperor's army buried the fallen. Japan moved forward, faster than ever. Trains multiplied, cities grew, laws replaced tradition, and in textbooks, the samurai became history. But Saigo, he did not fade. His memory lived on, not as a rebel, but as a symbol of loyalty, courage, and quiet strength. Statues were built in his honor, songs were sung, and even the emperor, the very man whose government he had opposed, later pardoned him posthumously, calling him a man of unshakable virtue. Today, in Ueno Park in Tokyo, his statue still stands, not dressed in armor, not on horseback, but walking his dog in quiet peace, because even in the end, Saigo Takamori was never truly a man of war. He was a man of honor, and that, in any age, is the rarest thing of all. After the smoke of Shiroyama cleared and the last of the old swords fell silent, Japan did not pause. The new government declared the Satsuma Rebellion crushed. The samurai were finished, it said, a footnote in history. Progress would no longer wait for tradition. And yet, in the hearts of the people, from quiet villagers to weary soldiers, the name Saigo Takamori would not fade. For some, he was a traitor. For most, he was something more. A man who stood when it was easier to kneel. A man who lost everything, yet betrayed nothing. A man who died not for victory, but for principle. And in the soul of a modernizing Japan, that truth lingered like a forgotten poem in a drawer. Nearly 20 years later, in 1898, a statue was unveiled in Ueno Park in Tokyo. It was not a warrior's pose. There was no gleaming katana, no fierce eyes, no armor. Instead, the sculptor carved a simple man, in plain clothes, walking a dog, holding a leash with one hand and his other tucked calmly into his sleeve. This was Saigo Takamori as he was, and as the people remembered him. Not terrifying, not angry, but dignified, peaceful, quiet. Every day, citizens came to lay flowers, bow in silence, or simply sit near the statue and reflect. Children fed the birds at its feet. Old men smoked pipes nearby, and those who remembered whispered stories of honor, loss, and what it means to live for something greater than oneself. The samurai code, Bushido, did not die with Saigo. It became invisible, woven into the fabric of Japan's identity. In schools, students were still taught the virtues of courage, loyalty, self-discipline, and humility. In families, fathers told sons about Saigo, not to encourage rebellion, but to remind them that integrity could not be bought or erased. And in times of doubt, people turned to his story, not for answers, but for calm. Saigo would not have approved, they would say, when pride became arrogance. Saigo would have stayed humble, they whispered, when others lost their way. His life became a kind of mirror, not perfect, not unbroken, but deeply human. Long after his death, Saigo's writings began to circulate again. He had written poems, letters, notes to friends, and reflections on justice. They were not dramatic or grand. They were quiet, sometimes sorrowful, always sincere. "I asked for no monument," he once wrote, "only that I lived and died as I believed." Some of his lines were etched into stone, others into memory. In one poem, written while in exile, he reflected on impermanence. Like dew on the grass in the early morning light, so passes our time. History often rewards the loud, but Saigo was never loud. He was the stillness before the storm, and the silence that follows. He did not conquer lands or build empires. He did not seek power or fame. Instead, he became something rarer, a symbol of conscience. To this day, his descendants live quietly in Japan. Some are farmers, some teachers. They do not wear armor or boast of ancestry. They simply carry his memory in the way they walk, speak, and choose their path. There is no shrine to Saigo Takamori with flashing lights, no grand temple echoing with chants, just a statue in a park, a name in a book, and a feeling, one that remains even after the last page is turned. Now, as you rest, as the story softens into shadow, think of this. Saigo Takamori lived in a world being rewritten. He could have adapted, betrayed his values, walked away, but instead, he stood still, not because he hated the new, but because he loved the true. He loved his country not as it was or as it would become, but for the soul it carried deep within. He lived as a bridge between centuries, and died as a reminder that not all who lose are defeated. So tonight, let us remember not the roar of cannon, but the rustle of his robe as he walked through cherry blossoms. Not the clang of steel, but the silence of his last night, beneath a moonlit sky, as he whispered a poem to the wind. The 20th century arrived not gently, but with the thunder of machines and the sharp pace of ambition. Japan, once an island of rice fields, temples, and drifting paper lanterns, transformed rapidly into a world of trains, factories, and electric lights. Cities grew tall and restless. The emperor now sat at the center of a government aligned with industry and global power. And through this new Japan, as airplanes took to the skies and war drums beat in distant lands, the quiet image of Saigo Takamori lingered like morning mist that refuses to lift. He became a symbol, not just of the past, but of something harder to name: inner strength, moral clarity, and the courage to remain true, even when history turns away. As Japan grew stronger, it grew more aggressive. Wars were fought, first in Asia, then across the Pacific. Soldiers were taught loyalty, sacrifice, and fearlessness. And many looked back at men like Saigo for inspiration. But in truth, Saigo had never glorified war. He had fought reluctantly, mourned every loss, and died not for conquest, but for conviction. Some tried to turn his story into a rallying cry. But those who read his writings, those who understood his soul, knew better. He was not a sword, one poet wrote. He was a bell, struck only in need. As Japan moved through wars and through tragedy, Saigo's image remained, not sharpened, but softened, like a distant mountain, always visible, always still. After the bombs fell and the fires burned, Japan fell silent. The old empire had collapsed. Cities lay in ashes. Millions wept and wondered, what now? And once again, in the stillness, Saigo's memory returned. People did not speak of him loudly. They visited the statue quietly. Teachers whispered his story to children, not to raise them as warriors, but to teach them what it meant to be honest, to live with dignity, to hold to a purpose even when the world unraveled. In those years of rebuilding, Japan did not need heroes of battle. It needed heroes of heart. And that always was who Saigo had been. Decades passed. Tokyo changed. New generations were born who never knew swords or silence. And yet, every morning, as the sun rose over Ueno Park, joggers would pass by a certain statue, that of a man in a simple robe walking a dog. Tourists took photographs. Children asked, "Who is he?" And some old man, resting on a nearby bench, would smile and say, "That is Saigo. He loved his country more than himself." And the child, without knowing why, would nod. Because there are truths we do not learn with the mind. We feel them, like wind through the trees. In modern Japan, Saigo Takamori is taught in every school book. But the lessons vary. Some speak of loyalty. Others speak of duty. Still others speak of sorrow, the sadness of living between two worlds and belonging fully to neither. But all agree on this. He was sincere. He did not seek power. He did not lie. He did not bend his soul to match the world's noise. And in a time when many chased wealth, fame, or comfort, Saigo chose a harder path, the path of stillness. He listened. He served. He stood. And then, when the time came, he stepped away, like a candle extinguished not by wind, but by choice. Though the samurai are gone, their code did not vanish. It lives softly in small gestures, in the quiet bow of a shopkeeper, in the careful folding of a letter, in the way a craftsman sharpens a blade not to sell it, but because it must be sharp, in the silence shared between friends, when nothing needs to be said. These things do not wear armor. They do not carry swords, but they carry Saigo's spirit all the same. Now, as you lie still, eyes closed, breath slow, remember this. Saigo Takamori did not win his final battle, but he was never truly defeated, because to live with purpose, to serve without pride, to remain true, even in the face of loss, that is the highest kind of victory. Tonight, his story has come to you not to stir your mind, but to calm it, not to fill your heart with fire, but with peace. So let his footsteps guide you gently into dreams. Let the moon above Shiroyama rise once more in your thoughts. Let the wind carry the memory of a man who lived not loudly, but well. There are some stories that grow quieter the longer they are told, not because they fade, but because their truth lies in stillness. The story of Saigo Takamori is one such story. Now, we no longer follow footsteps or battles. Instead, we drift through his memory, like leaves caught in a slow-moving stream. That we see the world he walked, not as it was, but as it remains in the spaces between things. The hush of a village before dawn, the creak of wood in a sunlit temple, the scent of ink on parchment, the final echo of a distant drum. In Kagoshima, his homeland, there is a small garden that many do not notice. It is not marked with great statues or golden signs. Just a few trees, a stone path, and a wooden bench beneath a cherry tree. It is said that Saigo once passed here often, alone or with a dog at his side. He would pause, watch the petals fall, and say nothing. Perhaps he thought of the Satsuma domain as it once was, full of youth, pride, and quiet discipline. Or perhaps he thought of nothing at all. The garden remains, the tree still blossoms. And though he has not passed that way in over 100 years, some say the air there still carries a trace of his presence. Not in sight, not in sound, but in the feeling that you are not alone. In a drawer at the Kagoshima Museum lie several letters, some incomplete, some never sent. They are not declarations of war or statements of ambition. They are simple, handwritten notes. One, addressed to an old friend, reads, "Time is not kind, but neither is it cruel. It simply moves. We must decide how we walk within it." Another, found folded inside a book of Chinese poetry, says, "I wonder if history will remember us for what we tried, or for what we failed to protect." There is no signature, only the date, autumn 1876, the year before Shiroyama. These letters were not meant for fame. They were moments of thought, small reflections like raindrops on paper, now preserved like fallen leaves pressed between pages. There is only one known painting of Saigo Takamori made during his lifetime. It is not detailed. In fact, strangely, the eyes are missing. The artist, unable to capture him directly, had painted him from second-hand descriptions. Instead of showing his eyes, he left them blank, just empty spaces where a soul should be. People often stop and feel uneasy, not because it's incomplete, but because it feels more real than a perfect portrait. Saigo wasn't just a man. He was a presence, a memory. It's late now, and time doesn't matter anymore. There's a special kind of late when everything feels still, right? That's when Saigo thrived not in the noisy noon, but in the peaceful night. He'd wake up before dawn, stroll by the water, and just be, writing sometimes, or just breathing. He knew the power of action, but also valued those quiet moments of letting things be, in letting the world unfold like paper slowly. There comes a time in every life when the sword must be set down, not in defeat, but in peace. Saigo did not fear that moment. He welcomed it, because he knew what we carry inside is always greater than what we hold in our hands. The sword may rust, the armor may break, the title may be lost, but kindness remains, courage remains, purpose remains, and in the end, that is enough. That is more than enough. Cherry blossoms, sakura, fall not when they are old, but when they are most beautiful. They do not resist. They do not cling. They let go gently into the wind. Saigo often compared life to that fall, graceful, unhurried, and natural. He did not try to stop the world from changing. He only asked that we remember what should never be forgotten. Not glory, but grace. Not victory, but virtue. And now, as we drift ever closer to sleep, perhaps we can carry that lesson with us. Let go, gently, like the blossom. Imagine a narrow street just before sunrise. The stones are still cool. The air carries a hint of earth and wood smoke. Shutters creak open, and a bird starts to sing softly, signaling the end of night. A man in simple robes walks down the empty street, sandals whispering against the stone. He bears no weapon or title, just the peace of someone who has lived fully and completed his journey. It is said that this is how Saigo Takamori walks in the dreams of those who remember him, not as a soldier, not as a statue, but as a quiet man returning home. What remains of a life when the voice is gone? Some leave monuments, others records. But Saigo left something harder to describe. A feeling, a standard, a presence. a kind of silence that speaks more than any command ever could. His legacy is not carved in stone. It's found in how one bows before speaking, in how one stands when it would be easier to sit, in how one keeps their word when no one is watching. Bushido, the way of the warrior, was never about battle. It was about balance. And Saigo lived as its stillest point. There is a story, unverified, but lovingly told, of the dog Saigo walked through the streets of Kagoshima. They say that after his death, the dog returned to the park where they often sat together. Each morning it came. It waited. It slept beneath the cherry trees. It did not beg. It did not bark. It simply remained. The people fed it. Children watched over it. And when it too passed quietly under the blossoms, someone carved a tiny stone near the place it lay. No name, just a paw print. Some say it was loyalty. Some say it was grief. But perhaps, like its master, the dog simply understood that some things are not meant to be forgotten. Time does not rush in Japan. Not entirely. Beneath the city's trains and neon lights, there is still a pulse, a soft breath beneath the noise. It lives in tatami mats and tea kettles, in the way a letter is folded, in the silence between questions, in the hush that falls when one speaks of Saigo's name. Even now, when tourists pass his statue and do not know his story, they often fall quiet. They don't know why. They don't need to. Some legacies do not explain themselves. They are felt, not told. Close your eyes now. Let us walk together, not through time, but through memory. We are in Satsuma, the southern edge of Japan, where green hills meet ash-colored sky. The sea is calm. The earth is warm. The trees sway with the wind, like they did 2 centuries ago. You walk a narrow trail through the hills. There is no sound but the distant call of a heron and the soft brushing of your sleeves. Ahead, a figure waits. He does not turn, but you know who he is. There is no fear, only recognition. You stand beside him, and for a moment, nothing needs to be said. 2 souls, 1 silence. And in that silence, you understand. Peace is not forgetting. It is remembering ... gently. Perhaps you are not a warrior. Perhaps you carry no sword and have no cause to die for. But you carry burdens. You make choices. You walk a path. And in that, you are not so far from Saigo. To live kindly in a world that rushes. To speak truth when it costs you something. To remain steady when others turn. That is its own kind of bravery. So when you rise tomorrow, if the day feels too loud or too sharp, remember the quiet man in the park, the way he walked, the way he chose, the way he lived without needing to win. Take a moment to breathe and slow your steps. We're almost there. Imagine a simple room with a paper screen, a tatami floor, and a small candle flickering in the middle. There's a cup of tea cooling nearby, a folded letter, a sword resting for memories, and a pair of sandals in the corner. Warm, simple. There is no sound here, only stillness, only peace. This was Saigo's world. Not the battlefield, but the quiet between battles. Not the command, but the waiting after. And now, as the candle flickers low, we let the light go. Let the waves return to the shore. Let the cherry blossoms fall. Let the ink dry on his final letter. Let the footsteps fade from the hills of Satsuma. Let the samurai sleep, not in defeat, but in dignity. And let us too rest. Tonight, you have walked through another's life. Now return to your own, not loudly, but gently, like Saigo. Good night.